What does the flute guy from the Game Awards have to do with the Avatar films, and why was he playing an ostrich egg? You're about to find out, as I recently had the amazing opportunity to speak with the composer of the Avatar films, including Way of Water and Fire and Ash, being Simon Franglen, all about his work on the films, and it's one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. So let's get right into it. Simon, first of all, thank you so much for joining us here to talk about your latest movie, Fire and Ash. It's so exciting to talk with you because, I mean, the soundtrack, first off, the movie is amazing. So congrats on all the success so far. The soundtrack in particular, absolutely beautiful. I was watching the movie with my dad on my second or third watch, and he leaned over at one point and commented just how beautiful the soundtrack is. And he doesn't do that for any film. So that really is a shout out to just how good the music is and how it complements the entire experience. So I was curious, first off, as one, who's been involved with Avatar since effectively the beginning, including I believe, all three movies, as well as World of Pandora at Disney World. And given the fact that Avatar is now the highest grossing trilogy of all time, that effectively makes you the most successful film composer of all time. How does that feel?
Somehow I think there's a few people who might disagree with that. I mean, I think if we add all of the box office for people like John Williams or Hans, somehow they might
Okay,
be a little higher. But
fair
yes,
enough.
but I am very proud to be part of this, and it's enormously fun because I get to actually. I have a director who loves music, and he also wants me to try things out and do things and create whole new textures for each film. So each film has been approached differently, and that's really exciting.
That is exciting, and because you've been involved with the series, as I mentioned now, for I mean, I guess it's approaching 20 years at this point. And from everything I've seen behind the scenes, it seems like James Cameron is very hands-on with almost every facet of the film, and that seems to include the soundtrack as well. So I was curious, what has your experience been working with James Cameron and on these Avatar films, and how does that compare to, other films or anything else you've worked on?
Uh, Jim is unique in when in that he cares about everything so much. I mean, there used to be this thing that John Landau, our producer, used to say, which was there was this we had this funnel that had 3,500 people at the top, and that just goes down to one man. And the great thing for me is that I only have two people to please. I have to please myself, and I have to please Jim. And there are no other opinions that matter. And why that is unusual is that almost every other movie, the film company will have an opinion, the producers will have an opinion, the executive producers will have an opinion, the executive producer's daughter will have an opinion, as has happened on occasions in the past, or their son decided that they listened to something cool and wouldn't it be good to have something sound like this. None of that happens. It's just Jim and me in a room discussing the music. There are other directors I work with for whom that's the same. But for a lot of directors, they never have the level of control that Jim has. And that gives us freedom uh, to, to really try and investigate the music and make the best out of it.
Well, that's fantastic. It's so great to hear, yeah, the true authorship that both you and the director seem to share with on, in particular on Avatar. So, how is that collaboration process? Because I know in many cases with films, the composer's often brought in toward the end of the project, when the film is, effectively content complete otherwise. But it sounds like it's a very different process for when working with Jim over on Avatar. So, how does that back and forth work?
I wrote the first cue for Avatar 3 in February 2018.
Wow, that's crazy.
So that was on-screen music for the Wind Traders jig and for something that Zoe sang, which isn't in the film, but I'm using as part of the themes for the film. And so those, I had to prepare those because they needed to be done with actors live on stage.
Right.
And the actors had to, so Zoe had to have a song to sing. She had to have a lyric to be able to sing. She had a melody. So that I started early. That's how early we get in. I'm right there at the beginning. And that's phenomenal for me because it means that I get to really immerse myself in what's going on. And I met Una probably the summer of 2018, maybe late 2018, something like that, when she first came on board. And it was obvious that when she appeared that she had just that magical thing that happened, that you see on screen, because that's people don't forget this isn't it's not cartoon. This isn't animation. This is real performances. But the
Right.
real performances extend to the fact that if I have the Wind Traders playing music on a galleon, they have to not only play the music, but they have to have instruments that are Pandoran instruments.
Hmm.
So I get to design instruments that will be played by a 10-foot tall blue alien with 3 fingers rather than 4,
Wow.
and then give them to the art department who make them beautiful in 3D, and give them create 3D models for them. And then the prop master prints them out for me in human size so that the human actors and musicians and performers can actually play these instruments. And then I use those sounds in the film score. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So, so you were actually designing new instruments for the movie?
Well, I couldn't have them playing banjos.
That would be amazing, but probably not the right fit for this.
Yeah. So if you are an ancient culture like the Wind Traders and you have traveled around the world of Pandora, then you are sophisticated and you have more sophisticated scales for their music, which you will hear in their music, and then you have more sophisticated instruments than we might have had with the original Metakaya, who were the main clan that we met in A1, or the Mekaina, who we meet in A2. So I gave the Wind Traders something slightly more sophisticated. It's vaguely Arabic, but it's actually technically a harmonic minor mutant because I do wrong things to that. But the point was that we have to make things. Everything has to be made for the culture. If
Right.
they're going to design the costumes, then I've got to design the musical instruments.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. That actually does remind me of another facet I remember reading about the first Avatar, which is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were there for most of that, I believe, was that originally it had been explored to do an even more alien soundscape for the music design, which I believe was pulled back away from. So I was curious if you could tell me any more about that and whether you've looked back to some of that original work for inspiration when working on Way of Water and Fire and Ash.
They had been working in that direction. It also incorporated some vibes of James Horner's Apocalypto score, a bit like that. It was more sort of dark and groany, and I was called in. I think they had basically abandoned that approach and decided it wasn't working,
Mm,
and that was when they phoned me. And my first instinct when I came in on January of 2009, is I looked at the first cue I worked on was Jake when the forest starts to glow around him. And I looked at this glowing forest and thought it's gamelan. It's these gamelan bells and metal that you hear in Bali. And I wanted to have that texture, which was very different from the way they were going. And then James heard it, went, "Yeah, that's really good." And then I started building the sounds for the wood sprites as they landed on his shoulders. And so I then spent the rest of the year working on A1, and that was my job was the exactly that, the vibe. So it was the textures and the colors of Pandora musically, but also the rhythms and the grooves, because that's a big part of the way that I work.
wow, it's wild to hear that, especially because as you were talking about that specific scene with the spirit flowers, or I forget the exact name.
Wood
I'm
sprite.
Wind sprites, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
hearing it. I mean, I was literally hearing it in my head. That's how iconic that is.
Yeah.
So, where do you reach for, like, for your inspiration? Like, when you see that imagery, like, how does your mind connect that to the sound that you think would be a good fit for it? And not just for A1, but any of your movies.
I think every sound, yeah, first of all, the film tells you what to do. You sit there messing around, flailing, hoping that things, and then eventually the film tells you that you found something that works.
Right.
And it is, or you think you found something that works brilliantly and you are completely fabulously happy with it until your director tells you otherwise. Or you do. I mean, sometimes there are situations where you very much, I think, oh, I've done the best thing ever. And then I come back to it a week later and discover no. But I'm also looking for the I start often with trying to work out, okay, what's the emotion I'm trying to tell with in the scene? Because my job is to give you the feeling underneath,
Hmm.
rather than say television music, which tends to be more what you think.
Right.
I don't do what you think. I do what you feel. And the the point here is to try and then find a heartbeat within that. And sometimes it's rhythmic, sometimes it's a textural thing. I'll give you an example. There is this the point. There's a scene called "I Am the Fire" in Avatar 3, where Varong and Korige are in the yurt together, and there's a point where everything changes. We think we know we're going one way, then we think we're going the other, and then there's a point where she says, "I see you," and Corey says, "Damn right you do."
Right.
And there is this hardest, toughest kick drum I could make, and it's very loud in the cinema, as I think you would say. And then these extremely aggressive synths going on, which is not
Yeah.
a color that I've used in the score much before, at all, not in overtly. And I looked at it and thought, this is a scene where everything changes. It's Jim and I were talking about it last Friday. It's like almost exactly at the halfway point of the film, and it's like the pivot point is the moment that those guns go into the hands of the ash. And I wanted the ash in their own way. I built these textures for the ash, and it was to be the exact opposite of everything that I had done with the other clans on Pandora. They're
Hmm.
organic. They may be different variations of organic. Omotakai is different to Metkaino, who's different to Wind Traders. But the Ash was the exact opposite. The drums are hybrid electronic. They are there. It's almost coming. I took of it from my pretend punk days when I was little and young, and I was a wannabe punk, and I used to hang out with the real ones, um, and the thing was that there was an aggression, but there was also the Ash had a similar vibe, which is punk was about the fact that the world had turned it back on them,
Hmm.
and the Ash feel that Pandora has turned her back on, or Awa has turned her back on them. And that energy is something that I wanted for the Ash. It's also why I used more in hers, these Mongolian string instruments for that the texture, because I tried electric guitars and it was just too earthy. I needed to give it something that felt more slightly weirder, and these Mongolian instruments did it. But those are the things you do. First of all, it was an emotion. How did I want it to feel?
Hmm.
I mean, I know that's a long answer. I hope it answers some of what you asked.
No, it absolutely did. I know. And you even touched on other things I wanted to ask. So you covered a lot of ground there. And I do have to say, just that whole sequence you were just describing with the Ash Clan, just so arresting, both visually and musically, as you mentioned. I mean, it just stands out in my mind even now, just how pivotal, as you mentioned, that whole scene really is. And it's absolutely largely part due to the music we came up with. So, how? I mean, it sounds like from everything I'm hearing and from what else I've read elsewhere, it sounds like there's probably a lot of some ideas you've explored that maybe didn't make the final cut for the film, or at least elements that you had considered. Is there anything that you were exploring at some point that you liked but just didn't quite work with the film? Or I would love to hear more about that, Ben.
Oh, well, no, you see, unlike every other composer in the world except for Mozart, every note I write is perfect first time. Unfortunately, the 7 hours of demos that I made for this film
Wow.
tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
No, it is a constant journey of exploration and also just tearing things up.
Right.
I'm very good at setting my children free. One of the things that you have to do is not be precious about these things, because the film will tell you when it's right.
Right.
And the that was a scene where I knew instantly the the whole scene. We worked right from the beginning to the end. And I have to shout out to my orchestrator Stephen Baker on some phenomenal work in this one, because we build. If you take the actual scene, it actually almost is 11 minutes,
Right.
because it starts when he walks into the ash camp. And then
Hmm.
there is a build all the way through, and and so on. And there were bits of this that took forever that you wouldn't think would take forever. For instance, there is a heartbeat drum when he's outside before he goes into the yurt, where he and Varong are standing off. That drum, I must have tried 10, 15, 20 different variations across months,
Wow.
trying to get the drum to be at the point where it had this feeling of tension, of danger, of being a heartbeat, and I could like dial it in and out so that just sort of I build the tension and thing to get the sound to where I wanted it and I was happy with it. Was one of those really annoying things where it's a simple drum that goes bum 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 bum, and you think that will, oh, I can do that like that. Problem is that once you do it, you realize that, especially with sounds that have to go for many minutes across things, you have to provide something that is has a bit more variation. So started there, but then when we go into the hut, there's this point where she blows the psychedelics up Varong's nose, up Quaritch's nose, and at that point we go into this weird psychedelic head trip, and the orchestra is doing all this amazing psychedelic stuff, and the choirs, and I'm playing in Dolby Atmos. I'm really spinning things around your head. It's all going, you think you know where you are, and so on. And that's, that's an essential part of it. Then you think, then it's Varong telling the story of why they are the Ash. So I went as simple as I could. I went to literally Pedro Ustesh playing, who gamers will know from the World Game Awards. I think they would see the flute player in the corner who.
Yep.
Yep, okay. So Pedro is playing this exotic. It's actually an ostrich egg at this point,
Oh wow.
and it's this breathy thing, and it's Varong's melody. I then add voices. I made Varong's melody out of that ostrich egg and three voices, and the three voices are going up and down in pitch, and they are going around your head because she is a sorceress. She is an enchantress. I
Right.
wanted that sense of the spell coming through there, and that's building. And then the Ash, the Morin hers come in, and we think that she's completely in control, and she's got the knife, and she's encourages completely out. And she says, "I will eat your heart, Corey," and so on. All of the stuff, the good stuff. And then there's a point where it changes and it flips, and you realize that actually there's a point where Corey says the line, "Well, that sounds like a nice weekend," and so on. And then Quaritch's theme comes in on brass, and you realize that actually he's actually the one in control.
Hmm.
And then we move to the bit that we talked about earlier, where with the kicks and the snares thing. And this cue, this is it's meant to be this point of you're constantly, the music is helping you understand who's on top and who's on bottom
Right.
in terms of the power struggle that's going on between them, until the end when we discover that they are now a part, as Jim would say, they are the power couple from hell.
A very apt descriptor for them. Yeah, they were just amazing to watch, and hearing the music accompany it really sold that dynamic, I think. Um, for you, I suppose, what was the most, was there an element of the film that was particularly challenging that stood out to you, and maybe something that was harder to lock in than compared to others, or was it all, pretty pretty similar
No,
experience?
I think there were. I'll tell you the one that probably was the most difficult. It sounds in some ways the simplest, but it wasn't.
Hmm.
There is Kiri saving Spider, the miracle.
Right.
And when we initially started working on it, it was 6 minutes, and I had 6 minutes to get a build going. Gradually, the scene got cut and snipped and snipped and snipped, and now it's about 2 minutes long. And you have to somehow get that sense of time passing, get the sense of her. This is meant to be a ritual that's not happening over 2 minutes. It's meant to be a ritual that's happening over time, and
Mm.
so on. And then I wanted this idea of the spirit world calling back at her. Right? And we now discover this is I've talked in the past about Easter eggs I've planted. So in A2, I had this melody. Ma-da-da. Now we discover that it actually has a lyric,
Oh,
which
wow.
is Ma'ewa, which is now being sung. And I just wanted, and that's the first time we hear the lyric. And it is this idea of almost the spirit tree and the spirit world singing back as Kiri is channeling them and so on. And I think that scene was really tough to get exactly right and to get it to so that I wasn't too big because a load of the time I tried I was going to be this big epic thing. Actually, it's still only there's Kiri took Loak and Spider. There's nobody else there. It's not like there's 50,000 people. There's a
Right.
difference between that, say, and when when Grace is trying to be saved in A1, where you have the entire clan doing a chant. This was different, and it had to have a different energy.
Wow. That's amazing. I've already seen the film 3 times. I'm going again for a fourth this weekend. So I'll be definitely paying even more attention to that scene, hearing all the full context behind it. Though I'm sure I absorbed it on a subconscious level before, but that's just incredible to hear. Speaking of watching the movie, how many times have you seen, would you estimate you've seen the movie yourself at this point? Like, have you actually watched it beginning to end, or were you just kind of like, I'm good with it now after watching so many segments of it, I imagine, over
Every
the years?
scene, I mean, I would say that every frame I've watched 10,000 times,
Right.
probably. But I've seen the film before we actually had the premieres. I saw the film probably 8 times in total in various forms of completion as
Okay.
a complete run from
Oh,
beginning to end.
I see.
Right. Over 2 years or something like that, I would see rough cuts as a whole thing, just to get a shape and a feeling of it. But the difference was that one of the problems with watching every frame 10,000 times is that the jokes no longer land
Right.
because you know that you know every line and you know everything else. And the going to see it the first time for the world premiere and the other premieres I've been to I've actually seen it with the public as normal people rather than premiere audiences who have been invited. I don't mean normal people, you know what I mean. Paying
Yeah.
audiences is suddenly all these jokes appeared, and suddenly these moments where people cry happened, and all of the emotion that comes. And I'm a huge thing about cinema
Hmm.
is that you get that shared experience
Yep.
that you don't get when you're watching a TV or you're watching your phone or you're watching your MetaQuest 3 in my case, or you're watching a Vision Pro in my case, or you're doing whatever else you do. That's a completely different experience. Even when you and your family and you're saying pass the popcorn, that's not the same as being in a room with 500 people watching a show.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah. I mean, I need the cinema experience to stick
Yeah.
around. I mean, I love watching Avatar at home as well. Not the same as on the big screen, of course.
Yeah.
And related to that, I was going to ask, I had a question right in mind for that, and now it escapes me. Oh, actually, yes, sorry. W when you're watching it back now, fully complete, is there a moment that you mentioned, how the jokes, they're no longer funny after hearing them 10,000
Yeah.
times. But is there a moment you're still surprised by that resonates with you, either emotionally or something else, whether it's your own music or a scene from the film?
Yeah, I think there are things that really I absolutely feel like I can feel that I cry at movies. I don't cry any other time. I cry at movies. Um, and there's still moments there. I think at the end, I feel as we're doing the final pull out, I still get a tear in my eye. There are moments like at the end of Sacrifice.
Hmm.
At the end of Sacrifice, without when there's that point there where we think what's going to happen is going to happen. I'm going to just spoiler alert. That gets me, and I've seen that 10,000 times, and I'm very proud of that as well because it was a piece of music that really took some care to get that flow because it's a prayer. basically that cue is a prayer that
Right.
goes on. And then there's the last 5 seconds is when it really comes into you discover that you think things aren't, it's never going to go there. It's never going to go there. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It had me fooled. Like that, the music was amazing during that sequence, and every time I somehow cry more than the previous time.
yeah,
It
yeah,
almost always tricks me. Like, is he going to do it this time? Luckily, he doesn't. But yeah,
yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
We did have a question from submitted by one of our fans who wanted to ask, what's something having worked with James Horner, who unfortunately passed after the first Avatar, is there anything that you learned from working with him on the first movie or otherwise that still carries with you to this day?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying. Um, I think the thing I learned more than anything from him was how to play that sense of emotion. He was a phenomenal player. His ability to understand how to get a theme to resonate. I hope I learned that from him.
Right. Well, I think that definitely comes through in the final product. So mission accomplished.
Yeah, thank you.
Then, since you helped work, or I believe you helped compose for the World of Avatar at Disney World as well, I was just curious, for you, it was composing for a sound, for composing for a physical place any different than composing for a film?
Oh yes, I mean, first of all, I did 5 hours of music for that.
That's a lot.
So I was before James's death, I was producing the music for that anyway, and then they asked me to then become the lead composer, obviously after his death. And the yes, because first of all, we're dealing with the happiest place on earth.
Right.
There are no sacrifices in Disney World,
Hmm.
and therefore you have to play. The people are going there. You want to be an immersive thing, and the point about the way that we dealt with the air with the park is that the music is there to give you that sense of immersion. And there's a whole load of little things like we've got people singing in the forest around the park. So if you listen every so often, you will hear people singing just in the background, and that's to give you the sense that the Omaticaya are there. You just don't see them walking around you. There
Wow.
there are things like that level. There is a thing in the I'm very, very, very proud of Flight of Passage. It took me a long time to get that right. But yeah, and by the way, that's my 7-year-old son singing in the forest.
Really? That's
Luca,
amazing.
Luca, that was a vocal that we recorded for Avatar 1. He is now 23. So,
Wow.
but we've recorded that, and that was something that we put in there. Jim used Luca's original voice on Avatar 2 as well, and he's in Avatar 1. So, and then we had him sing on Avatar 3. But anyway, dear digression. Um, the the park, for instance, there's a point when you're in the queue line for the Flight of Passage that you go through this desolate piece of RDA, and there, if you listen very carefully, you will hear the Pandoran things. There are these tubes, which are basically the old air ducts of the RDA. They sing. As they sing because the wind is going through them. And I made basically what is called an Aeolian harp. I made
Hmm.
a thing where the wind is meant to be going through them and they sing in resonance. If you listen very carefully, you'll hear them singing Pandoran songs. The other last thing I'll say about that, if I've got time, is my favorite bit about that is you can walk between the bar and the restaurant. There's an hour of music playing between those two. They're perfectly in synchronization, but the bar has been made by a guy who's an Earth guy, stayed in Pandora, and and therefore took surf mutant electro lounge surf music and hybridized it with Pandoran music, and then the restaurant is playing full on orchestral Avatar, but you can walk between the two of them and they perfectly synchronize for the hour.
That is incredible. Next time I'm in Disney World, I'll be just sitting there for an hour listening to the entire thing. So, unfortunately, it looks like we are out of time. But Simon, thank you so much for sitting down with us to talk about Avatar: Fire and Ash and some of your other history. I'm a huge fan of your work and the movies. They're absolutely incredible experiences, and I hope everyone goes to go see Fire and Ash if they haven't already. So, again, Simon, thank you again so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
And you too. It was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for having me.